I'm attempting to get rid of the Candida in my gut. I have a consult with a functional medicine doctor. She says, I want you to start a functional medicine detox. My friend Michelle is an absolute genius doctor with 2 PhDs, specialization in Chinese medicine, 5-element theory, organ theory, lectures at Cambridge. She had personally treated me in 2021 when I experienced adrenal fatigue and actual burnout. She has literally saved my life. She goes, mold is not the full extent of the problem. You are still just treating the symptomology of your condition. You have to meet Nuno. This man is a living genius. He has a clinic of integrative medicine in Lisbon. He has seen over 70,000 people and get to the clinic and narrow-mindedly misdiagnosed a lot of my symptoms as the result of molding. He can diagnose you and know exactly what is going on in your body. And I meet this man, he doesn't know anything about me. He looks at me and then he says, this all started for you in July of 2019. Welcome back. We are picking up where we left off in our last episode and delving even deeper into health, wellness, and understanding the real root causes of how we're functioning, using my story as a sampling board. So I was in New Zealand for a couple of weeks. Everything seemed to be going well. Then I went back to Bali, where I'm based for a percentage of the year. And for about a month in Bali, things were still pretty decent. At this point, I'm now attempting to get rid of the Candida in my gut. So something that was also present in addition to the mycotoxins was an overgrowth of Candida or a fungus infection in my gut, my microbiome. That's something that Dr. Patrick had diagnosed. Now, if you want to do a really quick and easy at-home Candida test, here's a really fun hack. First thing in the morning, get a glass of water. It doesn't have to be filtered. You're not drinking it. You want to get a glass of water, and before you drink anything, before you brush your teeth, straight after you wake up, spit in the glass of water and allow that spit to just do its thing. It's going to kind of dissolve and make its way around through the water. And what you'll see is if you are normal and healthy and functioning and you're fine, it'll just kind of dissolve and the water will still look clear. If you have Candida overgrowth present in your system, then that spit is going to start to create a cloud-like structure in the form of like a web. Like it looks like a cotton ball that creates these little kind of spider web tentacles that will start to come down in a very strange way. And so you're basically looking at either clear water or this cloud-like tentacle substance. If you have that cloud-like tentacle substance, you have Candida. So you can also test the severity of that and look at, how drastic it is and how bad it is, the overgrowth, and you can see it potentially getting better, right? So I did that at-home test in January, February, and it was bad. And I was like, okay, yeah, I can feel in my stomach that, I'm very aware that I have a lot of sugar cravings. I'm still kind of lethargic. It's really hard to fight the sugar cravings. So if you don't know much about Candida, it is a yeast infection. Now, it can stay in the gut and it will just be in your stomach and you'll be craving the sugar and the starches. So crispy things, potatoes, pastas, things like pizzas, things like that. If you are craving those things all the time, you would definitely want to be looking into this because it's not normal to be craving those types of things, right? So the Candida, the overgrowth of fungus, needs starch and sugar to continue living. It is something that is existing inside of you. It's foreign. It's not supposed to be there in that overgrowth state. You will naturally have a form of fungus in your biome and it should be even. So if you have an overgrowth of the fungus, it is needing something in order to stay alive and continue living inside of you, right? Now, it can also make its way down into your genital tract. And so you can have what's known as thrush, and that is a form of Candida. So they're different forms of the same thing that's living in different parts of the body. Now, I only had it present in my gut, so I didn't have any genital symptoms of yeast, just the cravings for sugar and starch, which are very, very hard to beat. So the only way that you can really get rid of that Candida overgrowth is by doing a anti-Candida diet coupled with taking an antifungal. Now, this is something that, again, you kind of need to talk to a medical professional about, because it is really hard to get Candida. And I have a few friends, I know a few people that have had Candida for either their entire lives or a decade, and it's something that they'll, attempt to get rid of, and things might get a little bit better, but it comes back. And so what I regularly hear about from people is that it came back again, and it came back again, and it came back again. Why does it keep coming back? And it's really challenging to get rid of. So, here are some other symptoms of Candida, so you can kind of recognize if you might have it. You might have some white patches on your tongue, the inside of your cheeks, roof of your mouth. So you want to really have a look at the tongue and see if there's any coating there. That cotton-like feeling in the mouth. You could have pain while you're digesting, swallowing, cracking, redness at the corners of the mouth. And really those cravings is going to be the big indication. So the reason why it's so hard to do the anti-Candida diet, which is basically just cutting out starch and sugars, right? Which is easier said than done, but there's starch in a lot of food. So there's starch in potatoes. So even in a lot of vegetables, there are naturally occurring starches and naturally occurring sugars like fructose that you need to be really careful about. So the diet is very, very specific. And you need to do that for at least 90 days for the Candida to die off, as well as taking some kind of antifungal. So I had attempted to start the anti-Candida diet. I was about 2 weeks in when I had a craving that was so intense that I couldn't overcome it, caved. And then after 1 or 2 days, I tried again, lasted about 2 weeks, caved. By the time February rolled around, with 2 attempts at the anti-Candida diet with my antifungal, I was like, okay, this is really, really hard, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. I just kind of went back to eating whatever I was craving, and throughout February, I noticed my health rapidly decline again. Everything from the fatigue to the brain fog to, bloating, weight gain, everything. And I'm like, okay, this is really bad again. There's got to be a way. I was talking to a friend of mine who also lives in Bali, and he owns a functional medicine clinic, actually a few of them. And he had just had Candida and gotten rid of it. And I was like, hey, how did you get rid of this? What did you do? Can you help me through your clinic? How did you do it? I've tried twice and it's really hard. And he was like, yeah. He's like, well, you have to do a special protocol, So I go to his clinic. I have a consult with a functional medicine doctor. So now the number of doctors and different people that I'm seeing, naturopaths, holistic doctors, chiropractors, functional medicine doctors, is now starting to add up. I'm seeing more people and talking to more people about all of these things, right? Trying to get a holistic answer and looking at things comprehensively, realizing that there's more to this than just mold. So she says, okay, based on this whole story, you had exposure to mold, you have Candida. We know for sure you have Candida based on these symptoms. There could be other things happening here. We want to get a variety of functional testing done. So this is something that never occurred to me because I just had never dealt with any of this before. So I was like, okay, what tests do we do? And she goes, you need to do a blood test, a hormonal and thyroid test, and a gastrointestinal test. When you do the blood test, I want you to test for these very specific biomarkers. And so it's not a regular blood test. You're going to need to ask your doctor specifically and say, I want these 20 to 30 things tested, and can you please do them? And they might argue with you and say, well, we don't need that, and that's not part of our regular testing. She's like, you need to push back and say, I need them and I'm willing to pay for them. And if you deny me this, then I'm going to do X, Y, Z and hold you accountable in 6 months or 12 months. And basically you need to push back and fight for your sovereignty in this case. And I was like, okay, wow. So I was really looking forward to doing all of this because I wanted to have some biomarkers and, I wanted to have a start point to reference where everything was. Now, for the hormone test, the most comprehensive hormone test in the world is the Dutch test. It's saliva and urine over the course of a day from when you wake up to when you go to sleep. And so you can kind of see how your hormones track throughout the day. There's a very specific window if you are a woman when you're supposed to take it on your cycle based on, levels of estrogen and progesterone and things like that. So it's also really important that you are mindful of your cycle, that you're tracking your cycle, and that you are doing this test in that window. I think it's like a 4 or 5 day window when you're supposed to do it and not outside of that because it's a very expensive test and you'll need to do it again. And then also, with the thyroid as well, you'll be able to see all of the different thyroid markers. So I do the tests. I get some of the tests back. I am then starting to feel kind of hopeful, and while I'm waiting for all of the tests to come back, she says, I want you to start a functional medicine detox. It's 3 weeks, order it from here. And then after you've done that, we can start the Candida Protocol and you'll have to try the anti-Candida diet again. It is going to be 90 days, but you're also going to take, this very particular set of supplements as well. And it's more comprehensive than just the antifungal. So the Candida protocol that I'm on is the CBO protocol from Dr. Stephen Cabral. It's not cheap, but if you think about what's included, it's 9 different bottles, 3 bottles a month. So when you kind of do the maths, it makes sense. That's something that you can look into if you're interested. So I'm doing the functional medicine detox and hating it. While that's happening, my friend Michelle, who lives in the UK, is an absolute genius doctor with 2 PhDs, an area of specialization in Chinese medicine, 5-element theory, organ theory, lectures at Cambridge. Like, this woman is a genius, right? She's an incredible acupuncturist. She had a clinic in London for about 18 years, I think. And she treats celebrities. Like, she has celebrity clients that travel all over the world for her and she'll travel all over the world for them. She's really, really good. And she had personally treated me in 2021 when I experienced adrenal fatigue and actual burnout. So I knew that she really knew what she was doing and was very comprehensive. And also I had experienced firsthand the wonder of her genius and was like, I trust this woman with my life. She has literally saved my life when I experienced adrenal fatigue and burnout back in 2021. It never occurred to me to reach out to her during this process, but luckily for me, she happened to be touring Australia, speaking on science and the body. And so she was in Melbourne for a couple of days and said, hey, I'm going to be in Melbourne. Let's catch up. Would love to see you. Haven't seen you in too long. So I went to her. She had this 2-hour window of free time. And when we caught up, she's looking at my eyes and my tongue and she's taking my pulse and she's like, what is going on with your health? I've seen you posting some things about mold. Like, sit down, tell me the story. What's been happening? And I'm realizing, I should have reached out to Michelle. She would have been the perfect person to talk to about this. Didn't even occur to me. So I tell her all of the background story that I've just shared with you. And she asks me a few more questions, looks at me and she goes, listen, you need to understand that mold is not really the full extent of the problem. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, neither is Candida. She's like, you are still just treating the symptomology of your condition. And at this point, I am pretty mind blown. I would actually love to play you a clip that I recorded from the conversation that we had.
The complexities of symptomology, because another thing that we love is complexity. Human beings are very well trained and programmed in the art of complexity. If it's not complex, then it doesn't feel like it serves a place in our environments, right? Like, the more complex, the better you are at navigating complex systems, situations, emotions, it makes us feel like we are better at life, Right?
Yeah, it validates the ego. Like, oh, all of my pain and suffering has been worthwhile.
Exactly.
And so it needs to be complicated. Otherwise, I went through all of this for nothing. And I cannot bear the possibility that I've gone through all of this pain and suffering for nothing. So it must be this complex thing that I couldn't have possibly figured out. Otherwise, I would feel like a fucking idiot.
Exactly. Totally.
But actually, it's just fucking simple.
It's simple. So even like, and the symptomology becomes that, right? It's like the complexity of symptomology. We get caught up in the mechanics of it, in the way that we are experiencing the mechanics of it. But the mechanics of symptomology is actually really simple.
And then if you think about this from like the medical perspective of where the power lies in regards to people who are allowed to diagnose and prescribe, who are powerful and, you know, they have egos built off the back of that power and that authority that says only I can know the truth. And so therefore you cannot know, when really we all would be able to have the ability to be able to effectively, as you said, once you can be trained to easily interpret the environment and what is flaring up the environment, what's contributing and perpetuating the environment, then you can effectively be completely empowered.
You can activate your inner physician. And you can. And we have been given a body for a reason to assume that I am inadequate in my body to know what's going on with my body is an absolute dissolution of why humanity is here. That is ridiculous. And also from the empowered perspective, and there are a lot of great doctors, you know, Western medicine serves its thing, but there is an awful lot of empowered physicians that are empowered by pharmaceuticals, which is why we had dope sick in the first place. And it may not be to that extravagance, but it still happens. You know, prescription pays.
Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah. And now we have a new industry.
Wellness.
Wellness is the new pharmaceutical.
Wellness is the new pharma.
What did you say? This was years ago. You said to me, wellness has been colonized.
Yes.
You used to say all the time.
Yeah, it has
wellness has been colonized.
That was years ago. And it's getting more and more and more so, because wellness used to be seeded in the roots of embodiment. Now, again, there is the power dynamic of unembodying somebody to prescribe protocol, prescribe supplements, and all of these things. And
this is what we're seeing with biohacking, is we're seeing this like very privileged group of white people who are doing a lot of fancy ass shit that doesn't need to be done.
Exactly. Totally. 100%. It's the same thing. Wellness is the new pharma, man. And just as expensive. We want to complain about the medical systems, right? And the how it's not accessible in some countries, right? Medical, like insurance and whatnot. Tell me that wellness is accessible.
It's not. It's not financially accessible.
There we have it. Wellness has been colonized.
We need to decolonize wellness.
Let's do it.
So what's the next? What's the third wave?
Oof. What, after colonization of wellness?
The decolonization of wellness. What is that?
What does it look like?
Yeah, what are we calling this revolution? Or is there a thing for it in the field? I'm not in the field.
Let's call it self-mastery.
Do you have colleagues in the field that are with you in this line, on the front lines?
Yeah, for sure. I also have colleagues who are disempowering people in their own ignorance of awareness of what's going on. And that sounds like a terrible thing to say, but it's easy to get pulled in the wave of something. Of course it is. Absolutely.
I've got a lot of colleagues that are in this second wave of thinking that they're helping with the supplements and the protocols.
Yeah.
But they are contributing to the colonization of what is inaccessible.
Exactly. And also I'd like to see, I'm all about data, you know, I love research, I love science. Science is definitely not always correct, and even that's been colonized, right?
Yeah.
But what we see when you change the environment of anything, of course you see change. Now show me that change is consistent, because it's very rarely is.
So I find out that I have DAMP, which I had never heard of before. I have a damp biological terrain. And it's my body that is susceptible to mold and candida growing in the first place. Now, with this newfound understanding of the body and with this logic, it makes so much sense why some people's candida keeps coming back. Because if they don't do anything to change their biological terrain, then of course it's just going to keep coming back. They have an environment that is susceptible for mold to come back, for mold to grow and spread throughout the body, for candida to continue populating and growing. It makes so much sense. At this point, we did a TD, a traditional diagnosis. So we did half of a TD. So I still don't have the full scope of what's going on with me because we only had 2 hours and, half of that was just us catching up. And she says, listen, I need to do a proper TD on you and it's going to take half a day and I want to treat you. I want to give you acupuncture. I want to get a full understanding of what's going on with you. I'm leaving in 2 days and I've got meetings and things back to back, but I'll be in Sydney next for almost a week and I can carve a day out for you so that I can treat you. Can you come to Sydney? Of course. Okay. I'll make it work, right? So I clear my schedule. We agree for me to come up and we have one day together. We do the TD and that's when we go into all of the depths of everything. Now, while we're in Sydney, here's the brilliant thing. So she's on this speaking tour and one of her colleagues, Nuno, is also there and she says, listen, you have to meet Nuno. And I was like, why? And she goes, this man is a living genius. Like he is to the level of Nikola Tesla. Like he is like a walking living genius. He's an engineer by trade, but he's also a magician when it comes to the mind and the body. And he's created all of these inventions. He has a clinic of integrative medicine in Lisbon. He has seen over 70,000 people in clinic. She said he can look at you and just read your energy. And from looking at you, he can diagnose you and know exactly what is going on in your body. She's like, he has actual testing that he can do at the clinic. And she's like, I strongly recommend that you go to Portugal this summer if you can and get to the clinic and we can treat you together properly. But you should just meet him because he's here and I can ask him if he can come over to the house. And I was like, okay, great. So Michelle and I do the TD and we discover that I have a myriad of issues. Now, when we get down to it and we're looking at the issues, what I'm realizing is that I have narrow-mindedly misdiagnosed a lot of my symptoms as the result of mold and candida. So what I'm going to do is share some of my symptoms with you, and I'm going to actually give you a map of how everything came together. Now, at this point, I had the results back from my hormone and thyroid test. And so Michelle was able to read that. I still didn't have the GI test or the blood test back at this point, so she couldn't read those. Some of the symptoms that I had was I had a lot of headaches. And I knew that it was getting really bad because I would take a lot of Panadol, Nurofen, and I know that you're not supposed to, and I know that it's really bad for you. But when you're trying to work and you have a headache and you need to work and get things done, you're just like, well, I know it's bad, but I'm just going to do it anyway, right? And that was getting kind of out of control. Like I knew that, okay, I'm getting headaches and I don't know why I'm getting headaches. So it was having a lot of that. I was very gassy. So that was getting pretty bad as well. There were the gastrointestinal issues. So there were the intolerances or sensitivities, just kind of trouble digesting, just a lot of really intense bloating, really, really low energy, still not so much brain fog, but definitely chronic fatigue was still pretty bad. And just low motivation in general, really hard to kind of have the will and the motivation to do things, which kind of just continued declining. So I thought all of that was just a result of, the mold and the candida, as I mentioned. I also had a very swollen, scalloped tongue at one point, which was about a week that I had that. So that my tongue was kind of swollen and was sort of getting these calluses on the tongue, these little ulcers, which is really wild. So when we look at things and she's going, okay, cool. Through the lens of organ theory, what you need to realize is that you have 12 organs. So first we'll go into organ theory. What is organ theory? In Chinese medicine, the body is understood as consisting of 12 main organs. Each internal organ has a specific role to play in the body, and they must work together harmoniously to ensure peace and wellness within the terrain of the human body. When you understand your organs and you understand what each organ is responsible for, then you can really start to look at how you can make sure each organ is functioning properly. So in Chinese medicine, they have deficiencies. So you'll have an organ that might be deficient in qi or energy. And when it's deficient, that's when it's going to start displaying certain symptomology. Now, what was happening was she was saying that the headaches were actually related to my liver. The gassiness was related to my liver. I didn't actually ever have a diagnosis for why I had headaches. And so that was really interesting and enlightening to know that my liver has some stagnation. Now, the gastrointestinal issues that were related to the mold and the Candida are actually caused by the damp. But the damp environment happens as a result of spleen deficiency. And that is also what was causing the swollen, scalloped tongue. So my spleen is deficient. Now, this is where it got really interesting. When I got my hormonal test, my Dutch test back, and the thyroid test back, it came back as extremely low testosterone, which I thought was very interesting. Because that explained why I have had low libido for quite a while, and also why I've had very little motivation and very will to do things and get up and kind of go. Like I might have had no testosterone, right? So lying around the couch, I'm tired. Now in the thyroid, what came back was I had low reverse T3 and low DHEAS, which is a hormone. And so those low reverse T3 and DHEAS were what was essentially creating a condition of borderline adrenal fatigue or burnout. And so the fatigue and the lack of will and motivation that I'm experiencing had nothing to do with the gastrointestinal issues. It had nothing to do with the Candida and the mold. Those things all correlate back to a kidney deficiency. And so I have two conditions, or I have two terrains. I have a damp terrain that's creating the gut issues, and I have a heat terrain from the liver stagnation that's creating heat. So I have a damp heat terrain, but the kidney deficiency is creating adrenal fatigue and burnout. So my spleen, my kidney, and my liver are not functioning adequately. And that's producing a myriad of different symptoms. So when you look at it holistically, you can see how if I was just focusing on Candida, like I'm still not looking at the holistic picture of everything, right? Because again, it's like you kind of do like this WebMD approach where you're like, oh, what are my symptoms? Oh, cool, that sounds like Candida. And it's like, well, there's a very complex process here to diagnosing things. And it's not as simple or as straightforward as saying, well, you have damp, right? Like someone else might have just damp. Someone else might just have heat. I have damp heat. And so those are two different things in the Chinese medicine system that need to be looked at cohesively as a whole, because there's also a very specific diet that will work for someone that has half of this kind of composition, but maybe not all of it. So this is now really interesting. I have a complete picture of the state of my whole being. And finally, I'm like, this all makes sense. All of it makes sense. But it's also very complex. So I say to her, what do we do now? Now that we know, what do we do? And she goes, okay, I'm going to put you on a protocol. It's very important that we don't overwhelm the body. It's very important that we don't confuse the body and that we don't try and do too much at once. You have put your body through a lot. And what's very common is we will put our body through things that will make it work harder, and so it doesn't actually get the opportunity to truly recover. So the functional medicine detox that I was doing for 3 weeks was actually not a great thing for me to do because it was making my liver work harder to detox. One of the best ways to detox your liver is fermented raw red cabbage juice, which is strangely enough very hard to get. So I had to order it. It took 2 or 3 weeks for it to arrive. I have it now. Had some this morning. It's so great. But that is for my liver qi stagnation. But that is a far more effective way than doing a lot of the different detoxes that actually put more strain on the body, because when you're taking all of these different supplements, when you're taking all of these different shakes and smoothies, depending on what else is going on for you, because I have a spleen issue, doing any kind of smoothie is actually going to aggravate the spleen issues that I have that are causing the digestive issues. And so you might be fixing one part of the body, but you might be aggravating another part of the body, which is why it's really important to look at everything cohesively, right? Because we'll just regularly go, I need to detox. And, we live in a culture that's very obsessed with detoxing. And so we don't really understand how detoxification works, right? Like, obviously, I had this kind of limited perspective of understanding the lymphatic system and going, Kambo is really effective detoxifier, and it is, but it's also one part of the larger picture. And I'm not recommending that everybody do Kambo. I think it's really important that you, again, consult with someone that is really highly skilled, that can look at your entire composition and not just have a narrow focus. And, there are some practitioners that will have a narrow focus, and there are some that are actually really, really comprehensive, like Michelle is, for example. So she says, for the next 60 days, you are going to do the carnivore diet. And I thought that was really interesting because the carnivore diet is very controversial. There is currently no evidence for the effectiveness of the carnivore diet. There's a lot of controversy around its merit. All evidence is purely anecdotal. Most people say that it's not something that you should do long term. So 60 days is not long term, that's short term. It's basically 2 resets of the stomach. Think about one reset as a 30-day period. So 60 days is a really good amount of time for the gut to readjust, for, the flora of your internal biome to adjust, die off. Remembering that it takes 90 days to effectively eliminate Candida. So the carnivore diet would be a form of an anti-Candida diet. When I asked Michelle about why we're doing this, why carnivore, her logic and what she explains to me, well, first she says, the carnivore diet is one of the most effective diets for any gastrointestinal issue. If you look into the research, there is a lot of anecdotal data for its effectiveness in eliminating SIBO and Candida. So I start Googling and I find all of these stories, people sharing videos on YouTube, and I was shocked. I'd never heard of this before. I didn't realize that the carnivore diet was a great thing to do for Candida or SIBO or anything like that. So I was very excited. What I also found, which was really interesting, was Jordan Peterson has been on the anti-Candida diet for over 5 years. He did an appearance on Joe Rogan in 2018. And he credited the carnivore diet with curing his lifelong depression, anxiety, and autoimmune related issues. He's had fatigue, psoriasis, so skin issues, gastrointestinal reflux disease, and gum disease. So he said that his gum disease was incurable. And after 5 years on the carnivore diet, all of his conditions, some of which were incurable, have completely reversed, which is really mind-blowing. There are a lot of anecdotes for really incredible things if you start looking into the carnivore diet. It is drastic, and again, it's something that I don't suggest you do at home without consulting with someone first. But she says to me, her logic is, if you are having different vegetables, different things, fibers, whatever, she's like, it's putting pressure or strain on your gut to digest all of these different things. If you keep the food group to something very, very simple, so you're mainly eating fats and proteins, you are alleviating your body from having to digest things that requires a lot of work and a lot of energy. So you're essentially giving your body a really big break so that it can recover and return to homeostasis, because there's a really big philosophy in the medical world or in the healing world where this underlying principle is that the body knows what to do. The body is a very intelligent organism and it heals itself if it has the capacity to do so. So what we see is that if we get out of the way, the body has a chance to do its thing and return to homeostasis, that point of balance where we're supposed to be, right? Homeostasis is perfect balance. And if you look at the governing laws of the universe, everything has to return back to balance eventually. This is why we have seasons, day and night. Everything is a complete paradox of polar opposites and one of the laws of the universe. And so the body is part of this natural phenomenon. We are nature. So it makes sense that we would have a living, thriving ecosystem that is always in flux, always changing. Nothing is rigid. You need to always be looking at the seasons of yourself and going, okay, cool. Well, there is a lot of evidence for fasting. There is a lot of evidence for water fasting as a very effective way to eliminate a lot of disease. It's really important to note that if you are a woman like myself, that fasting can be very dangerous depending on how you go about it. So you need to make sure that you're aware of how to fast in accordance with your cycle, because if you do it at certain parts of your cycle, it can be very dangerous. The carnivore diet means that you are still getting all of the things that you need, but you are essentially getting some of the benefits of fasting because you're not overwhelming your body with needing to digest so much. So 60 days of that is simplifying what goes in. You're getting the nutrients that your body needs. It's really important that you're not just eating the exact same thing every single day. So we created a meat accountability group with 2 other friends who are also doing the carnivore diet for 60 days and just kind of sharing how we're going with it, what we're eating, getting inspired. Because I'm me and I'm a little bit funny and crazy, I go all in on the carnivore diet. And so I'm posting daily updates, what I'm eating, what I'm trying, and I'm getting really into it. I'm like, okay, great. So I start making my own bone broth. I'm making that every 3 or 4 days. First thing in the morning, I'm drinking my broth. I'm having like raw duck egg yolks, getting everything sourced, pasture raised from farms. I'm drinking raw milk. I'm spicing it up. And one of the things that Michelle says in the group chat is you want to make sure that, you're not just eating ribeye every day. You need to get some variety. So I take that to the extreme, as I do with everything. And I go and I source wild game from the market. And I get venison, I get goat, I get kangaroo, emu, buffalo. I'm having raw liver as well. And I'm doing that partly, because it's novel and I kind of need a bit of novelty to be entertained if I'm going to do something for 60 days that is so restrictive. And then partly because she says, you need variety. I'm like, all right, I'll give myself all the variety I can take. So I've been on this carnivore diet for 16 days. And so far, what I can report is that within the first week, I lost a lot of weight very immediately. The bloating went away on the second day. I was like flat stomached. I couldn't believe it. My mental clarity became very, very good. I was very mentally sharp. So there was a very strong difference from, the intense brain fog to all of a sudden I can feel like my mind is very energized and functioning very highly. I have very clear thought. I can feel my stomach and my gut feels good. It feels energized. It feels unstressed or unburdened. Everything is processing properly. There's no issues with excrement. That's all fine. Everything is going pretty well. And the only thing that I'm still experiencing is the fatigue, which, as we know, is not a result of the gastrointestinal issues. It's a result of kidney deficiency. So we don't want to introduce other things, right? And so she says that when we move on from focusing on the gut and we start focusing more on the adrenals, we're going to be looking at a lot of herbs and tinctures, mushroom related things, for example. But if we started to do that now, it would overwhelm the body and we need to really make sure that we give the body time to adjust. So I will share with you the protocol that I'm on altogether, which is really important. So the protocol is to make sure that when you are doing the carnivore diet, if this is something that you're going to do, that you really are mineralized and taking your electrolytes very seriously. So going out and getting some electrolytes. The quality of the water is very important. And so water has become a really big topic. I generally do drink a lot of water, so I never thought that I was dehydrated. But when I met Nuno, one of the first things he said was, you are dehydrated. We'll get back to that story about what he said in a minute. I want to just focus on the physical before we get to the metaphysical. So we do need at least 2 liters of water a day, but we need really good quality water. And so what does that mean? By now, you've probably heard people talking about the crap that is in our tap water. And depending on where you live in the world, it's going to be worse than other places. But tap water is really bad. And so you might have a filter system. And if you do, good job. I don't have recommendations of any kind of filtering. But what I have started to do, which I will continue to try to do, is drink spring water. So even if you have a filter at home and you are filtering tap water, it is not going to be anywhere near as good as spring water. So from an actual natural spring, right? So if you buy that bottled, we're looking at Antipodes from New Zealand, Voss from Norway, there are going to be different local things. In Australia, in Melbourne specifically, I managed to find a company that sources called Olinda Springs, and they just deliver it to your house, and you can get, 15 liters and 45 liters delivered at a time. And so you can just kind of have that, and that's really easy to do. So if you can find a local company that can source and deliver spring water to you so you have access to that, that is the best thing that you can possibly do for your body. Because if it's sourced from a spring, and this is going to get a bit woo, but I mean, if you're still here and you've sat through me talking about Kambo and the laws of the universe, then you'll be fine with this. Water from a spring is water from the earth, right? And so it has an electrical current because it is from nature. It hasn't passed through systems of pipes and like sewerage and cleaning to get to you. Water is a living thing and it does die. And so when water goes through a pipe system, it loses or it changes its electrical current. And by the time it comes out, not only do you have fluoride and sediment and things that come off from the metal of the pipe that can be, toxic, but the quality of the water's aliveness, the prana, the life force, is gone by the time it gets to you. So even if you're filtering out the fluoride and the sediment and the mercury and whatever else, the lead that could potentially be in the water, you're still not getting the electrical current of the earth that you need. Remember, we are nature and we're designed to live in nature and be connected to nature. And our lifestyle today, those of us who live in big cities will feel this more than anyone. You'll be aware that when you go to, I don't know, let's say you go hiking in Italy or something, right? Let's say you get somewhere into the waterfalls of Guatemala and you're like, wow, I just feel so refreshed. Or like if you've ever been to Costa Rica and you're like, wow, the jungle, just, the earth is so fertile here. And then you kind of go back to a big city like New York or Chicago or Melbourne and it's metropolis, it's buildings everywhere, concrete jungles, and you're very disconnected from nature. And you just don't feel the same. You kind of get used to it, right? But when you get back into nature, meaning like you have your feet on the ground and you can really feel the charge of the electrical current of the earth up into your body, zapping your body, giving you life force energy, then you feel the subtleties of when your body is really, truly alive versus when it's sort of in this state of, for me, the best way that I can describe it is kind of feeling like a zombie. Right? Like you just don't really feel alive. And so when you're drinking tap water, it's water, right? But you don't really notice it until you have something else. So when you grow up in a city, you don't really notice that you don't feel fully alive until you get into Costa Rica, or like a jungle where you're really connected to nature and you're walking around barefoot and you're like, wow, I feel so alive. So drink 2 liters of spring water a day and report back to me and let me know how alive you feel, because it is such a noticeable difference because it is alive water. It's electrically charged, right? One of the other very scientific things that is non-woo-woo about this is that water from a spring will have unique mineral properties to it. And we are very, very deficient in minerals. And you really shouldn't be like taking a mineral supplement. You need minerals from your food and your water, right? It needs to really be absorbed. A lot of the times when we're taking supplements, those supplements aren't even being absorbed properly. And so again, we've become a culture that's obsessed with supplementation along with detoxing, and we know so little about how that actually works. I'm going to get Michelle on the show to talk about all of this in depth with you because I think it's really important. So mineral content differs, from spring to spring, but you need to be getting those minerals. We're looking at like sodium, calcium, magnesium, TDS, all these things. And excuse me, I'm not a water scientist. I'm just a gonzo journalist. So Ionic zinc drops after an infrared sauna, very, very important. And making sure that there's molecular hydrogen as well to help the body return to homeostasis. The fermented red cabbage juice, and then the carnivore diet. So electrolytes, 2 liters of spring water, Ionic zinc after a sauna, after sweating, molecular hydrogen, fermented red cabbage juice first thing in the morning, and then the carnivore diet. So that's my protocol for 60 days before we move into tinctures and herbs for the kidney deficiency. So far, so good. Feeling pretty good. Now I'm going to come back to meeting Nuno. So we're in Sydney and I meet this man that apparently just by looking at you can tell you exactly what's going on with you. He has no context on me. Doesn't know anything about me. All he's heard is Michelle said you need to come to the house and meet my friend. So he comes to the house. We shake hands, we hug. It's really nice to meet you. I've heard so many great things about you. And he looks at me and he's like, may I? I was like a bit nervous. What's he going to say? He looks at me straight away, says, your digestive system is all messed up. It's really, really bad. And I was like, yeah, I'm aware of that. But that's really cool that you can just see that. That's wild. And he goes, your right hip is a little bit out. Your left knee is a little bit out. My right hip is out. I do have a pelvis slight out of alignment, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. It's related to my daddy issues. And then he says, and you have a lot of irrational fears. And I was like, hey man, we all have irrational fears. Leave me alone. And then he says, this all started for you in July of 2019. And I'm sitting there thinking, July 2019, I don't remember anything that happened in that month. And that's a really long time ago, dude. And then he says, also one more event that left an imprint for all of this to occur, September 2019. He said, these 2 events created an emotional imprint that has influenced your terrain and your psychosomatic component. For anyone who has maybe heard the word psychosomatic before, or maybe for those of you who, are familiar with this, but want to know a little bit more, this is really, really important. So I've been studying psychosomatics for probably about 5 or 6 years. I've never gone to a level of specialization or expertise, but I think it's really important and really interesting. And there are quite a few fields of psychosomatics that you can kind of look into. For example, German New Medicine is one of them. I have a friend that practices that. Examples of people that have created work in the field of psychosomatics would be Louise Hay with You Can Heal Your Life. That is a really big extent of it. Annette Newton has written a really incredible book that has a list of different parts of the body and symptoms and what they correlate to emotionally. So the first and most important principle of psychosomatic medicine in clinical practice is the acceptance of interrelated psychologic and physical problems as an intrinsic characteristic of all medicine. All symptoms are by definition subjective, and all disease occurs in and is influenced by a psychosocial context. So what that means is that when we're looking at something that is occurring in the body, right, like all of my mold and my candida and, all of my stuff, it's important that we are looking at more than just the diet, lifestyle factors, exposure to toxins, etc., but that we're also looking at the emotional component of what is contributing to these types of diseases. So there is an emotional correlation. There is a mental component, a metaphysical component, if you will, that contributes to all of it. And it's important that you look at all of it in cohesion. And I think there was a period of time where I was probably just looking at the emotional cause because I didn't have access to the education around the physical body, around organ theory or terrain theory. And I was just really focusing on the power of the mind and the emotions and the stories that we produce. And, I think, again, if there's one thing that I really want you to take away from this, it's that we can never really look at things in silos if we want to have a true, comprehensive, accurate understanding of life or of what's going on. And, if you want to get as close to the truth as possible, you need to bring as many different perspectives in as possible. You need to look at the body and the mind. You need to look at the yin and the yang. You need to look at everything. You need to hold all of it and have a comprehensive picture, right? So now Nuno is giving me insight to the psychosomatic element of my current health condition, which is really going to blow you away because I think a lot of you are probably going to be able to relate to this and, it might become a political conversation. We'll see. So I'm trying to figure out what the hell happened in July and September of 2019. And I said a really significant event in 2019 is that I left Australia and I moved to Bali, but that was in August. And that was a positive thing. It was really great. My life has only kind of gone up since then. So I can't imagine what two things occurred that created a negative impact on my body. I don't understand. And, Michelle's sort of saying, well, maybe it could have been this, maybe it could have been that. With more contemplation and reflection, I realize what happened. So if you remember my origin story and where everything started, and I say, my life really kind of started in 2019 when I was 26, 27 and embarking on a journey of figuring out how to get out of my credit card debt, how to make my business work properly, how to leave Australia, how do I, build a life for myself and create freedom and sovereignty and all of these things to a degree that I have now. I'd, in May of 2019, come back from a trip to the States and realized that I needed to move to the US or, get out of my environment and, be somewhere that was growing and supportive of my growth and what I wanted to achieve. And I wanted to move to New York. So from May until July of 2019, I was in relentless pursuit of trying to figure out how to get to America, looking at visa opportunities. How can I make that work? I was pursuing a very specific type of visa that was kind of a bit in the gray. I'm happy to just tell you about it because I'm not doing it now, so I haven't broken any laws. So essentially, there's this little gray loophole where you can set up a company like an LLC in the US with an American, and they would essentially be like a 51% shareholder and you'd be a 49% shareholder of that enterprise. And then through that company, you sponsor yourself as an employee. So you can see what I mean when I say it's a little bit in the gray, it's a bit dodgy. So one of my friends told me about that loophole, and there's a lot of people that do it. Some people never get caught. If you do get caught and you get audited, it's kind of like, okay, what are you doing? We can see what you're doing here. And you might get deported. So it's, it's like, do you want to roll the dice with that? It's not really super great idea. I'm not 100% sure on the exact legalities. I think it is really gray. Back then, I didn't really have much to lose and it was something that I was willing to do. At this point in my life, it's not something that I'm willing to do. I'm very much at this point like, okay, I have a level of public relationship and I need to be very careful about following the rules to a degree. So I was pursuing that and trying to find someone that was willing to set up a company with me and be like a 51%. And everyone that I spoke to was like, listen, I think you're fucking awesome and I would love to help you and I'm just not willing to do that for you. And when July rolled around, I had kind of gotten through all of the people on my list that I felt sort of close enough and kind of comfortable enough with asking. And I got to my final no. And so in July, I had this very heartbreaking, sad, disappointing, existential moment of, oh my God, I've spent 3 months pursuing, trying to do this thing. I've already paid the visa person, 50%, but no one's willing to do this with me. I don't see how I'm going to be able to get out of my circumstances. Like, how am I ever going to get out of my mum's house? How am I ever going to build my business? How am I ever going to be successful? I'm doomed and destined to a life of wallowing in never amounting to my potential. And this is so tragic and devastating. And I just want to get out of here. And I can't live this way anymore. I can't do this anymore. So that hopelessness, that helplessness, the disappointment, the I'm doomed to a life of suffering and never amounting to anything and never actualizing my creativity, all of the ideas in my head, my vision, becoming who I want to be, becoming who I know I'm capable of becoming. That's what I was being confronted with in July of 2019. The fuck, what if this is it? What if this is the end of the road? And like, I need to go back and actually get a job, you know? And I had tried, and I just was like, I'm just going to be depressed forever. And I'm going to have to medicate myself. Like, this is fucked up, man. You know, like, is this really the end? Am I going to give up here? And then, as you know, I found those articles on, you know, environment and reinforcing that. And I had that little moment with my intuition where I was like, what can we do? And it said Bali. And I ended up moving to Bali the next month. So things got a lot better 30 days after that moment. So then what happened in September? And then I realized that in September, 1 month into moving to Bali, when things were going really well, before things got really good, I had a really scary moment. So I had one client that I had been working with that was a 7-figure coach, and I was doing her content for her, kind of managing her social media. And she was, you know, I was on retainer. And so she was paying me about $3,000 a month, which was the only work that I had at that point in time. I think I was doing occasional photo shoots still. I was still sort of semi-working as a photographer, but not full time, because I didn't really want to commit to building or rebuilding my photography business, because I wanted the ability to really, truly work online and work from anywhere and have that be very mobile. 1 month into being in Bali and having had this client for about 4 months, I start to feel really disconnected from her. She starts moving in this other direction that I found really difficult to comprehend and understand, and just talking about things that made no sense. I became aware that the community that she had built became very cult-like, and I became very afraid of leaving. And so I kind of tried to maintain a level of autonomy. But I was disconnected, and I didn't feel in integrity or congruent or in alignment with what she was doing. And I was like, I think I need to quit working with this person, but I don't know what to do, because I don't have my own offers. I don't have my own service. I don't have any savings. I don't have that safety net. And so I'm afraid of leaving, even though that I think I really should. So I was kind of aware of that for about 2 weeks, contemplating it. And then she just pulled the trigger and said, I don't think you understand what it is that I'm trying to do, and you need to leave the company immediately. And so the contract is over. You will not be paid for next month, kind of like, you're leaving now. And so I was forced to that was obliterated. My one lifeline of $3,000 a month was gone, with no savings, right? So remember, at this point in time, I have $700 and I have one credit card with a $10,000 limit. I had just managed to get out of living with my mom, you know, and getting out of the environment where I'm constantly being criticized, spoken down to, challenged, not supported, being told that I need to give up all of these crazy ideas. I need to just go back and find a job, and I need to do something practical, and I need to be sensible, and I need to stop with all of this madness. So I finally got out of that. I was finally surrounded by people that were doing what I wanted to do. And I was like, this is possible. Everyone's doing it here. Oh my God, everyone has successful businesses. People are living, you know, they're walking on the beach. They're going to the gym. Everyone's fit. This is fucking great. And I'd been in that for 30 days. And then my lifeline just got cut off and the rug taken out from underneath me. And so I was confronted with, oh my God, again, I'm going to die. What am I going to do? I don't want to go back home. Like, I'd already made the decision that I couldn't go back to that no matter what, because I realized the importance of environment and how that environment was only going to continue a spiral downwards rather than a spiral up. And at that point, I became very, very afraid of ever going home. So I kind of had made this declaration to myself that I would never go back to Australia, or that I would just never go back to that way of living, and that I needed that space, and I needed to become successful first. I needed to be really solid in that identity and in those beliefs and in that success, because I couldn't risk ever going back into an environment where I was challenged and my beliefs would wobble. So I needed to become unwavering in my success and in my identity so much that whenever someone would doubt me, I would just be like, water off a duck's back. And so that became a decision largely unconscious. And so those were the two events that created an ongoing series of behaviors and emotions where I was like, I can't go back home. I don't have a home. You know, I'm living this very glamorous life of being a digital nomad or a global citizen, and I'm kind of always traveling and it looks really fucking awesome. And, you know, for the most part, it's a pretty amazing life. Like I have a lot of fun and I have friends all over the world. And, you know, I have a friend, one of my best friends lives in Barcelona. One of my best friends lives in New Zealand. One of them lives in Cayman Island. One of them's in Berlin. You know, I've got mates in Austin and LA and London and everywhere. And there's always a place for me to stay and there's always fun things for me to do. And I get invited to parties all over the world. And I get to go to festivals and cool things and networking, and it's fucking great. And the dark side of that is that there's this constant hum of anxiety that runs in the background where I don't really have a stable, solid anchoring where I feel safe. Because there's always visa restrictions and limitations. Well, you know, I can't stay in Europe because I can only get 90 days in the Schengen. I can't really stay in the US because I can only have 90 days on the ESTA. I can live in Indonesia. That's kind of fine, but living in Indonesia also has its own challenges, and it is really challenging to find a long-term lease in Bali just by the nature of the way that the environment is set up there. And so there's still this kind of ongoing, like, I've got to move again. You know, they won't let me rent this long term. They're only doing it nightly or weekly or monthly. And so that gentle hum in the background has created a very strong sense of instability. The other night, I visited a friend's house, and this is a beautiful house. And I thought to myself, oh my God, imagine what it would feel like if you just had a stable home that you owned, that you knew was yours. You never had to worry about rent. You never had to worry about visas. I felt the stability and the safety in my body on such a deep level. And I imagined what it would be like having, hypothetically, a man in my life that was providing for me, and I never had to worry about providing for myself. And the level of safety that I felt in my body was so foreign. And at that point, I realized how much emotional stress I have been experiencing throughout my entire life. Now, mind you, some of this I've created and potentially recreated because of who my mother is and what I've learned and what I've normalized, because of where I've grown up and what I've come from. And it has been a very unique set of circumstances where my ambition has led me down a path that I think has been largely unavoidable. You know, I've wanted to become a particular type of person. And in my mind, the options are give up and live a life that is not circumstantially a life that I want to be living, but maybe I have that safety, or pursue self-actualization and continue to figure everything out in the process, going, there's no sacrifice that's too great. There's also the aspect of generational trauma that my mum has inherently passed on. And then there's the intergenerational. My mum's entire generation experienced war. They experienced a deep level of suffering on an economic and political level. That's passed on in the genes. You know, then we have my mum's personal individual beliefs that are passed on in the genes. And then we have my environment growing up and all of the things that I'm experiencing in my life. And so those are the psychosocial elements that we're talking about here. Where you come from, your level of privilege or lack of privilege, your economic status and your access to education, your access to money and resources and safety is going to influence your well-being. But the decisions that you make are also going to influence your well-being. And I think it is really common to see a lot of entrepreneurs go through burnout. And I think that the conversation in the entrepreneurial landscape is really centered on hustle culture and working too much as a source of burnout, and very little on the other factors, such as the emotional, mental elements of burnout, the alignment of what we're doing, alignment to values, and looking at potentially like where we've come from and what's driving us to do what we're doing. So we're going to wrap this health journey up now. I hope that this was really valuable and insightful for you. Remember, your body is your responsibility. Your wellness is your responsibility. And I think what we can do too often is outsource that responsibility and that education to doctors and say, can you just tell me what to do? Because we don't want to have to learn for ourselves what is really going on. But if you start a practice of meditating, and I don't mean meditating in the traditional sense where you're like sitting down and you're just, focusing on your thoughts. I mean body meditation, where you are practicing and cultivating an experience of body awareness, taking time every day to really be intentional about what you're eating, what you're putting into your body, how much exercise you're getting, and how you feel in your body. Monitor your urine, monitor your stool, look at your tongue, look at your skin. Right? Your body is giving you feedback all the time. It's trying to tell you stuff, and you need to listen. You need to pay attention. And it is really up to us to be able to know better than anyone else. There is no doctor that is going to know your body better than you, because they're not in your body. They're not experiencing what you're experiencing. They can only diagnose an area of what you might be telling them. And so really, we need to take the responsibility back. And I think what's really interesting is that, our generation have gone through a really amazing revolution in the mental health space, where we've started to become really aware of how trauma works. We've started to become aware of triggers and behaviors, and we have more knowledge now than we ever had access to. But that same level of literacy for our emotions doesn't really exist for the body. And I think it's time that we begin a body revolution where we are educating ourselves on our organs, on our biological terrain, on our nutrients, on our deficiencies, on doing what we feel and being the authority of our own body. It's time to take our responsibility back. It's time to take our power back. So if you have symptoms, if you are tired, if you do not feel fully alive, if you have headaches and you're just popping Panadols, if you're not sleeping right, I urge you to start bringing awareness into your body and start looking. I'm going to be bringing a lot more content to help you with education and access to resources. I'm going to try and do my best to bring all of this to you for free so that you can become a master of yourself and of your life, because the body is just as important as the mind.